Hey everybody, welcome back to the Miami Minute, where we cover my favorite team, the Miami Dolphins. So this is part of a larger podcast, like a sports podcast. You can find anywhere that you search for podcasts, as well as this channel, of course. But this is a specific clip that we're going to put out on the channel where we're talking about the Dolphins and everything that went wrong with them. So, Miami Dolphins, they finished the season 8-9. They missed the playoffs. They lose to the Jets 32-20. And fans are very, very upset about this. And I think that's reasonable. I'm also quite upset that the Dolphins missed the playoffs. It was a season that really had a lot of hope heading into it, a lot of expectations, if you will. 2 straight playoff appearances coming in to this season, 11-win season, a 9-win season, 2 wildcard losses the last 2 years. So it was a lot of, will the Miami Dolphins take the next step in their, maturity as a franchise, in their leadership under Mike McDaniel? And unfortunately, it was torpedoed by Tua, being injured. And as much as we can say, like, hey, it sucks. If he were healthy, we probably would have won 1, maybe 2 more games. Certainly that Colts game where we blew in 10-point lead to Joe Flacco in the Colts, or what's Anthony Richardson? It doesn't matter. We lost to the Colts, not a good team, also an 8-9 team, with the win over the Dolphins here, where, they came back against the Dolphins. So probably win that. I think the Dolphins have a much better chance to win the game against the Tennessee Titans if Tua were playing. But at the end of the day, Tua didn't play. And that's been a recurring theme. He's only had 1 season, last season, where he's played a full season. Every other season, he's missed at least 4 games. And, he's had a litany of injuries, right? So, finger earlier in the career where he missed some games there. Then, of course, we all know the concussions. Those have been horrible, horrifying even. But then he fought back. He was able to stay on the field last year. He was a little bigger, but he came back this year, wanted to be able to run more. He was a little smaller, and he got another concussion, missed some games from that. Then, with the season very much in the balance, at the end of the year, he was unavailable due to a hip injury. And, I really like Tua. I think he's the best quarterback I've seen, and granted, I've only been watching the Dolphins since 2001. So that started with Jay Fielder. Never got to watch Dan Marino and, the good times. I missed out on them. So I've seen a lot of bad quarterbacks play, and Tua is not a bad quarterback. However, as they say, the best ability is availability, and Tua does not have availability. And I know that he said that he wanted to play, and the medical staff didn't clear him, and people online heavily criticized him for not playing. Like, how could you do this? If the medical staff isn't going to clear him, he's not going to be allowed to play. It is what it is. I know it sucks. It does very much suck, but it just is what it is. So Tua missed the last few games of the season, and we went 1-1 with a win over the horrible Cleveland Browns, a loss over the New York Jets, who, coming into the game, I think a lot of people thought this team's beatable, even with Tyler Huntley. But Tyler Huntley played very poorly in this game. He had some good moments, but they should have been up 14-0 instead of 6-0 to start this game if Tyler Huntley were on in the way that he was against the Cleveland Browns earlier in the season, the week before. But that wasn't the case. Also, I hear a lot of people saying that when the Dolphins were up 6-0, they were playing hard. MetLife Stadium showed the highlights, showed the score of the Broncos and the Chiefs, and it became clear that the Chiefs were not playing hard in that game. And of course, they lost 38-0, and the Dolphins stopped playing super hard, which leads me to my next point of contention. Tyreek Hill. According to Mike McDaniel, he received word during the game that Tyreek Hill was unavailable for the Dolphins, and it was not a new injury. He pulled himself from the game. That's extremely disappointing, especially when you have players like Calais Campbell, a 38-year-old, probably his last year in the league, playing quite hard when there was really nothing to play for. That's commendable. You have players like Zach Sealer getting sacks when the game's, seemingly a bit out of reach, when the playoffs are certainly out of reach. So you have these players still fighting for the team, and you want all of your players to still be fighting to the very end, especially when you're someone as highly paid as Tyreek Hill is. And, someone who was voted number one player in the NFL last year. And I know Tyreek Hill had a wrist injury, but he was able to go. He was able to catch 9 balls the week before for 100 yards. So, very disappointing. So, of course, as any good journalists do, they follow up with Tyreek Hill in the end of the game locker room and they ask, hey, what happened there? And eventually, we got this quote from Tyreek Hill. I'm going to play it right now.
I mean, for me, like I said, man, I just got to do what's best for me and my family, dog. If that's here, or if that's wherever the case may be, man, I'm finna open that door for myself, dog. As I'm opening the door, like I'm out, bro. So it was great playing here, but at the end of the day, bro, I got to do what's best for for my career and what's best, because I'm too much of a competitor to be. Just
Does that mean
just out there.
Mean you thinking about leaving here?
If it is, hey, yeah.
So that's, of course, not exactly what you want to see from the number one player in the league, your best player. It's apparent that he is frustrated, 1, with Tua being hurt, 2, with the Dolphins not competing otherwise, and he wants out. He feels that he has nothing to offer this team if this team's not going to be competitive. And I think as a fan, your first reaction is, fuck you, man. The Dolphins gave you a huge contract. The Dolphins gave you a sweetener at the beginning of this season so that you'd come in still being highly paid. The Dolphins have really bent over backwards for this player who is now seemingly quitting on the team. And you know what? That might be my second reaction too. That's still my reaction. I don't like that the star player, one of the cornerstone players of the Miami Dolphins, is seemingly turning his back on the franchise. And then you look a little further and it's like, okay, if he wants to be traded, how do they even make that work? Who's going to trade for Tyreek Hill coming off a down year with a massive contract? The Dolphins, if they trade him before June 1st, are going to incur, I think, a $28 million cap hit. That's not appealing for the Dolphins, just having dead money, paying a player who doesn't want to be here and is no longer here. So they're going to have to work with the team that way as well. And it's just exceedingly frustrating that Tyreek Hill is not seemingly a team player. The very moment, the first time maybe in his entire career, when the going gets tough, he wants to get going. Very disappointing from that perspective. But the disappointment doesn't really end there, because we are met with a, press release from the owner, Stephen Ross, to the fans, basically saying, hey, I know you're frustrated. I know you want change. Change is not coming. That's right. Stephen Ross says that we are keeping not only Mike McDaniel, which I do kind of agree with. The first down year he's had, he's only one game under 500. There are a lot of issues with the team, but also Chris Grier, who I think kind of caused a lot of these issues by not focusing primarily on the offensive line. The offensive line for the Dolphins is terrible, and sometimes they'll have these great rankings, but it's Tua covering up the deficiencies of the offensive line. So we spent years, pretty much ever since Laramie Tunsil got traded, that started the whole rebuild in 2019 and kind of has ended here. We've had bad offensive line play all of these years. We never addressed it. There was a famous quote of Chris Grier saying, "You're more worried about the offensive line than we are." All I can say is, if we're continuing with Chris Grier as the GM, someone has to convince him that the offensive line needs to be addressed. Until the offensive line is addressed, this franchise is going nowhere. And also, it's probably time to seriously consider a backup quarterback that can challenge Tua, that can come in and not look like he's never played football before, like some of our backup quarterbacks have for the last few years when they have to fill in for Tua because the offense is so complicated, so complex, so built around this one player. Sam Darnold is not a great quarterback. He's an okay quarterback. He's about to be paid like a great quarterback because he stepped in for the Minnesota Vikings after presumed starter, rookie J.J. McCarthy, got injured, and he led the Vikings to a 14-3 record. Yes, the game last night, not great, but he did it. He was able to go in there, get plugged in, and succeed on his own merits. We need a quarterback who is going to be able to do that because we just can't count on Tua to not be injured. And it sucks. As I said, I really like Tua. I think he's a great guy. I think he's a really good player when he's healthy, but he can't stay healthy. So those are my thoughts. Another very disappointing season for the Miami Dolphins. It's tough being a Miami Dolphins fan, but here we are. Please feel free to leave me comments about how frustrating this season has been for you, because it's been so frustrating for me. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. If you're watching this as a podcast, we'll see you in the next segment.